On this edition of Early Look, I'm going to be previewing the welterweight fight taking place at UFC 299 between Kevin Holland and new UFC fighter Michael Venom Page. And if you never watched the show before, I'm going to go through a bunch of different stats, a bunch of different intangibles, and then I'm going to give you my prediction at the end of this video. Some of this stuff may have relevance, it may not, doesn't matter. I'll let you decide in the comments. Let me know what your prediction is for this fight. More I think about this matchup, and even before I did my notes on this fight really should have been on UFC 300. Missed opportunity by the UFC, because this is like one of those like fun kind of surprise matchups that the UFC put together. We didn't know if Michael Venom Page was going to go to PFL, what the deal was. We knew he was a free agent, but this is a fight that should have been on UFC 300. But either way, if you're going to Miami or you're going to be at UFC 299, this is going to be an awesome fight, and excited to get into this one. Let's do a quick tail of the tape between these two. You got Kevin Holland at 25-10, Michael Venom Page at 21-2, 31-36, 6'3" apiece. I kind of forgot Page was that tall. 81-inch reach to 79, so Holland going to have a bit of a reach advantage in this fight. They're the same height, and Holland is 5 years younger than Michael Venom Page. Let's start first with the Trailblazer, Kevin Holland, and talk about him and this matchup. So again, this is a 3-round fight as part of the stacked UFC 299 card. Going to be taking place in Miami. You can see there Holland 25-10. He's got 14 knockouts, 7 submissions, and 4 decisions. I mentioned it there. He is 31 years old. He's 6'3" with an 81-inch reach. I mentioned the height and reach advantage there. Or sorry, not the height, just the reach advantage, and a little bit younger. He's a BJJ black belt under Travis Lutter and trains at Travis Lutter BJJ. Kevin Holland made his amateur debut way back in August of 2012. Let's go all the way back. Made his pro debut in March of 2015. Had a bunch of canceled fights. Actually, interesting. He was supposed to fight Razak Al Hassan, who's in the UFC now. That fight didn't end up happening. So that was back in March of 2015. He had that fight there, and then made his UFC debut against Thiago Santos, which, if you remember, was kind of like punishment, I think, for Kevin Holland, because he obviously won on Contender Series, but they didn't like the fact that he was goofing around a little bit in that fight. So they were like, "Hey, how about you fight Thiago Santos in a fight that he lost, but Santos didn't finish him. He actually showed a lot of heart in that fight." So ended up losing that UFC debut way back in August of 2018 there. Kevin Holland is 12-7 in the UFC with 1 no contest. He's got 8 stoppage victories. Some notable wins for Holland. We can say this now. Maybe we couldn't say this a couple fights ago, but Anthony Hernandez back then was a very good win for him. Hernandez, obviously, time of recording this, picked up a big win a few weeks ago, or not a few weeks ago, last weekend, I should say. Looked really good in that fight. And so that's a notable win for sure. Also have to mention his win over Joaquin Buckley. I mean, Buckley obviously, is not ranked, but obviously, people know who he is. Jacare Souza was a contender at middleweight for a while. That was a good win, although he got Jacare on the tail end of his career there. And then the other big win there, Michael Chiesa, a ranked welterweight. You see the losses there. He's had a number of them. Some notable ones include Brendan Allen, Thiago Santos, who was ranked at the time, Derek Brunson, Marvin Vettori, Hamzat Chimaev, which, I mean, we could throw that out the window. That whole fight was weird about having to fight Chimaev on like less than 24 hours notice. Stephen Thompson, a ranked welterweight, and then also losing by split decision to Jack Della Maddalena, a fight we'll talk about a little bit later. So that's his notable wins and notable losses. He's had a few injuries here. If you remember, he was supposed to fight Antonio Arroyo back in November of 2019. He had an injury there that was undisclosed. I had a shoulder injury where he's supposed to fight Daniel Rodriguez. Too bad that fight never happened. That could have been a fun matchup there. And then he's had a couple close fights. We'll go through those. So his win over Gerald Meerschaert, which was a split decision back in March of 2019. If you go look on MMADecisions.com, you'll see that only 3 media members scored the fight for Holland. 14 scored it for Gerald Meerschaert. So that's maybe a fight that should have gone the other way. Then he had his win over Alessio Di Chirico. That fight was in June of 2019. Again, 3 media members had the fight for Holland. 11 had it for Di Chirico. So those 2 fights, I mean, we could have been talking about Kevin. I mean, Kevin Holland could have got released if he lost both those fights, to be honest. So kind of interesting those fights went his way, but obviously been a lot more successful since then. And then his last fight against Jack Della Maddalena, it was a split decision loss. If you actually go look at the media scorecards for that one, 16 media members scored the fight for Jack Della Maddalena. Not a single media member scored it for Kevin Holland. I remember it being close, but I did think that JDM won the fight, but again, something to kind of keep in mind there. And then as far as Kevin Holland's stats, you can see it there. Significant strikes landed per minute, 4.39. His striking accuracy is at 49%, which isn't too great. Striking defense is at 51%, so he has some good defense. Only 0.78 takedown average, which isn't a lot. Takedown accuracy is at 38%, although this is a pretty low stat for most fighters. If you have as many fights as Holland does in the UFC, you're not going to have great takedown accuracy. And then his takedown defense is at 53%, although I don't doubt Michael Venom Page is going to be throwing any takedowns in this fight. So that's pretty much it for Kevin Holland. Holland, again, hasn't fought since August, but known as one of the most active fighters in the UFC, one of the biggest personalities. Love seeing this matchup here with Michael Venom Page. Very interesting one here for the welterweight division. Now let's talk about his opponent, the UFC debutant, Michael Venom Page. So you can see there, Michael Page, 21-2 record. He's 6'3" with a 79-inch reach. He doesn't have any advantages in this fight as far as the physicality or anything like that. He's got 4 knockouts and 9 submissions. And I want to say maybe he's gone the distance a few times too. You can see 24% of his wins are by decision. He was actually not a Bellator welterweight champion. I think people forget that. He was a welterweight Grand Prix semifinalist, but never held gold in Bellator. One thing to keep in mind. He's got the most stoppage victories in Bellator welterweight division history at 10. He's got the most knockout victories in Bellator welterweight division at 9. He's tied with Freaky Pitbull for most knockout victories in Bellator history at 11. And yeah, that's pretty much it, because obviously this is going to be his UFC debut. Made his pro debut back in March of 2012. He only had 3 fights, and then he got signed to Bellator just 3 fights in and had a 10-second knockout over Ryan Sanders in a Bellator debut back at Bellator 93. It's pretty crazy that he fought under both Bjorn Rebney and Scott Coker. That's how long he's been with Bellator. So a bit interesting to see him here in the UFC gloves. Went back and looked at Page's Bellator record because we don't have any UFC fights. He was 18-2 in Bellator. He had 13 stoppage victories. Some notable wins for Michael Venom Page in Bellator were Douglas Lima and Paul Daly. And some notable losses include Douglas Lima, Logan Storley, and this wasn't in Bellator, but we can talk about this a little bit later. He did lose to Mike Perry in bare knuckle. That's probably the only other opponent that's somewhat notable that he's fought. One of the big criticisms of Page throughout his Bellator career, and this is something we heard a bit with Sean O'Malley in his UFC career, is that they really took their time in building Page up. I think there were times when you wanted to see him tested. For example, he never fought Ben Askren. There were times when they were just building him up almost too slowly and not getting that good competition. Some people feel like it's because they were trying to pad his record a bit. It's tough to say, but that's one thing that was frustrating about Michael Page in Bellator, was that he never fought the best of the best. He did fight, like I said, some Douglas Limas and some Paul Daly's, but that was a little bit too late, in my opinion. I think a lot of us wanted to see him tested a little bit earlier, but just my 2 cents on that. Michael Page has also got a kickboxing record. He's got 1 fight in kickboxing with 1 knockout. He's 2-0 in boxing with 2 knockouts, and like I mentioned, had the 1 BKFC fight back in August of 2022. Lost a majority decision to Mike Perry in that fight. He's had a couple close fights. Let's go back to the Douglas Lima win that he had back in October of 2021. There was a split decision win for him there. Went back and looked at the media scorecards for that. 6 media members scored the fight for Douglas Lima. Only 2 scored it for Michael Venom Page. So that could have been a loss for him there. So maybe he doesn't get revenge against Lima, because obviously he got finished by Lima in their first fight in 2019. But then Logan Storley, if you look at that fight, that was at Bellator 281, one of his more recent fights. That was in May of 2022. If you go look in the media scorecards for that, 3 media members scored the fight for Storley, 5 scoring up for Michael Venom Page. So that could have been a win for him there, and that would have been a really good win for him, because Storley, obviously, really, really good Bellator career. Overall, has looked pretty good, really good wrestling there, which will be kind of interesting. Now, I don't know how the UFC figured this out. Maybe there's a mistake. I'm not entirely sure. They do have stats for Michael Venom Page, even though he hasn't had a single UFC fight. So take this for what it's worth. I don't know where they're getting these numbers from, if they took the averages of his Bellator fights. I doubt they did that, but if you look at it here, it says his significant strikes landed per minute are 4.53. His striking accuracy is at 76%. I mean, that seems like his stats. You know what I mean? His striking defense is at 77%. That would seem to make sense here. His takedown average at 3.40. That doesn't seem very likely. Maybe I'm missing something. And his takedown accuracy and defense is at 100%. So I don't know where they're getting all that from. Is that maybe BKFC? I don't know. Obviously there's been some talks with BKFC and the UFC. I don't know if that's where they're getting all that from, but yeah, take that for what it's worth. Obviously, we know he's a great striker, and again, if you look at Venom Page's wins, majority are by knockouts. 56% of his wins are by knockout, only 19 by submission, 24 by decision. Okay, let's look at the odds for this fight. Right now, we do have some odds up on different sports books. You can see there, Kevin Holland, a bit of a favorite here, -130. Around there, -150 on Betway, etc. Michael Venom Page being the underdog. And then if you go look on Tapology, you'll see that 59% of fans are picking Kevin Holland to win, only 41% picking Michael Venom Page. Okay, who am I picking in this fight? Well, I think it's an interesting fight because I think it's 2 fighters that, if I can just be honest here, and I don't mean any disrespect by saying this, I think it's 2 fighters who will never fight for a UFC title. I think that's fair to say. With Holland, making... obviously Holland's sort of known for just taking fights when he can, and I think that's really hurt his career in terms of him moving up the rankings. And with Michael Page, he's 36 years old. Like, maybe if he wins here, there's an opportunity for him to maybe skyrocket like Michael Chandler did, but I'm going to still maintain this. I don't think either fight for a title. So as far as my pick goes for this fight, I'm going to go with Kevin Holland, and I'm going to take Kevin Holland by decision. Now, I know a lot of people picking Holland here would probably go knockout or probably submission, actually, because if you look at it there, Holland does have a lot of wins by submission, and we know Venom Page, his ground game, we haven't really seen a ton of it in his career, right? So that's one thing to sort of keep in mind here. But here's why I like Kevin Holland by decision. I'm going to go through a couple of reasons for this. Okay, first and foremost, 52% of Kevin Holland's wins are by knockout, meaning that while that is the majority of the wins that he has, he's also got some submission wins as well at 32%. Like, I don't really see him knocking out Michael Venom Page. If you look at the last knockout loss that Michael Venom Page had, and again, he's fought guys like Mike Perry who have knockout power. It was the leg kick to uppercut loss that he had against Douglas Lima. It was kind of a weird finish, right? In fact, I recommend going to Google and watching that fight. Not really typical of him having like a bad chin or anything like that. So, and again, for Kevin Holland, you look at most of his wins here. I know he had the Ponzinibbio knockout, but most of his wins are actually by submission recently, right? If you look at it here, Tim Means, Chiesa, I know he knocked out Oliveira as well, but Page does not seem like the type of guy, if you even look at his career here, one loss by knockout in his entire career. So I think likely not going to get a knockout there. Then on the flip side, you look at Kevin Holland. What's Michael Venom Page's best path to victory in this fight? It's probably by knockout himself. You look at the stats here, Venom Page, 56% of his wins are by knockout. Well, guess what? Kevin Holland never been knocked out in the UFC, and he's fought guys that I think hit even harder than Michael Venom Page does. You look at some of the middleweights he's fought, like, Derek Brunson, those types of names. Wasn't Thiago Santos was not knocked out by him, so I don't think Michael Venom Page is going to knock out Kevin Holland. The other key thing is this is only a 3-round fight. If it was 5 rounds, I'd lean more likely towards a finish in this one, but I don't think that'll happen. Holland, in my opinion, well, not in my opinion, Colin is younger, and he's also fought better competition. I think that goes without saying. Like I mentioned it there, one of the big critiques of Michael Venom Page in Bellator was that he just didn't fight great opposition. I just rattled off his best wins. One of them is against a guy that a lot of people feel like he didn't even beat in Douglas Lima, and that's the same Douglas Lima who also handed him a loss. Logan Storley, probably the next best one. Let's give him that win over Logan Storley. Let's go with what the people thought there. How would Logan Storley do in the UFC? Is he top 10 welterweight? Top 15? It's tough to say. How would Kevin Holland do against Logan Storley? I'd probably pick him in that spot. Should actually clarify something before I get ahead of myself, because I can already see the people coming out here. Holland was finished via TKO in the UFC, but it was a retirement, right? Like Wonder Boy technically retired him, but remember he had the hand injury there. Holland's never been flat out knocked out in the UFC. That's kind of what I'm getting at here. So I don't think Page will be the guy to do that. The other thing that we got to talk about is the fact that Michael Venom Page hasn't fought in over a year. That fight against Yamauchi was back in March of 2023, so he's going to have a layoff coming in. He's a bit older. That's another reason not to like Page here. And the other thing is Michael Venom Page has never been submitted in his career. I just mentioned how Kevin Holland gets a lot of submission wins. I don't know if he'll be able to submit Michael Venom Page. Again, it's only 3 rounds, so I think it's more likely the fight hits the scorecards as opposed to you seeing a stoppage in this one. So I'm going to go with Kevin Holland by decision to get it done over Michael Venom Page. It would be cool to see Page pull this off and, maybe go on some sort of run, but I just don't see it happening. I think people are not looking at the opposition that Page has fought, and I don't think there's any reason to think that he's going to turn it into another gear here by joining the UFC. I think, unfortunately, much like Ben Askren when he joined the UFC, I think it's a little bit too late for Page to go on any sort of run in the UFC. I hope I'm wrong, but that's just how I'm looking at things right now heading into this fight with Kevin Holland. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Who are you picking in this fight, and what is your prediction? I would like to hear from you, how you think this one's going down. I don't just want to hear a pick. I want to hear your actual reasoning as to why you think the fight goes the way it does. I want to get an actual prediction on this one. And make sure you follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and subscribe to this channel on YouTube. All the same handle. It's @LynchOnSports. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. And if there's any other fights you want me to preview, let me know in the comments. I typically hit all the main events, and obviously we got UFC 300 coming up, so I'll be hitting a lot of the fights on that card as well. Let me know what you think of this fight. I'd like to get your prediction in the comments. I'm James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.